I think we are now seeing the final days of this tragic and terrible episode going on at the Azovstal steelworks. If you think back a week or so ago, maybe 10 days ago, Putin announced that, and I think you've just reported it again, that he would seal it off so that not even a fly could get in and out. Well, that was an indication that the Russians were finding it very difficult to finally subdue the garrison there. They've now come to the conclusion that they've got to have some form of victory to celebrate on Monday. And it would appear that they've now resumed a direct attack on the steelworks in order to try and snuff out the remaining part of the resistance there, so that they can claim on Monday that they have captured Mariupol and therefore they have completed their land corridor from Crimea through the Donbass into Russia proper. I mean, this is a tragedy that's unfolding in front of our eyes. Some of the civilians may get out over a 2 or 3 day ceasefire, which is being talked about. But for the soldiers in there, I'm afraid the prospect is very grim. And I think we may also see the very ugly sight of Ukrainian prisoners being paraded through Moscow next Monday at their victory parade. It happened with the Germans at the end of the Second World War. I have an awful feeling it's going to happen again on Monday.
Tell us about the significance of this victory parade.
Well, it is the traditional annual victory parade marking the end of what the Russians would call the Great Patriotic War, the Second World War, when around about an unquantified figure of around 20 million Russians lost their lives. So they have every right to celebrate that. But of course, they don't have a right to have begun this war. They've got no right to celebrate this war. And therefore, I think we're going to be subjected to some pretty ugly and awful pictures from Moscow on Monday. As we've said so many times, this attack on Ukraine is totally unnecessary. It's disgraceful. It's horrendous. And once again, just well done to the Ukrainians, led by President Zelensky, for fighting back so hard.
I wonder if you could talk to me about the theatre in Mariupol. We knew last month, in fact, in March, that there had been a direct hit on the theatre where up to 1,000 women and children were sheltering in the basement of the theatre. We're told that children had been written in white letters that could clearly be seen from the sky in front of the building. And yet it took a direct hit. The Russians, first of all, said it was the Ukrainians that had done it. It transpires that something like 300 people originally, we were told, had been killed. We're now being told that number could have doubled. Is that a war crime?
It most certainly is a war crime, but it's also uglily characteristic of the way the Russians are conducting this war, this operation, the special military operation, as they're calling it. They have learned early on in the war that if they engage the Ukrainians chin to chin, toe to toe, the Russians come off second best. So they've adopted this appalling tactic of standing off and using artillery and cruise missiles, and many of those in a very unguided fashion. And I think this is exactly what I'm absolutely sure this is what happened to the theatre in Mariupol. An unguided weapon. Well, let's be charitable and say it was an unguided weapon, because if it was deliberate, it makes it even worse. But it doesn't really matter, because the outcome of probably 600 people losing their lives is quite appalling. And undoubtedly, by anybody's estimation, this is a war crime amongst a litany and chapter of other war crimes, the dossier of which is being prepared quite properly to be used at some time in the future. This attack on the theatre was really quite despicable.
Belarus saying it's conducting military drills. As a military man, what's your reading of that?
Well, I don't know, really. I think the relationship between a lot of Belarusians and Russia proper is somewhat ambivalent. We've got good evidence that earlier in the campaign, if you remember the big strike that came down from Belarus to achieve regime change in Kyiv, was in many ways interrupted and sabotaged by the Belarusian railway workers who didn't agree with what the Russians were doing. And the Russians had based their logistic plan on using the railways down from Belarus, but found that they couldn't. Hence, they used road transport. Hence, we got this 30 to 40 kilometer tailback, which became a huge target array for the Ukrainians. So I think President Lukashenko's hold on power in Minsk is actually quite tenuous. And those reports, I think, are propagandist type reports. I don't for a moment think that Belarusian forces will start to be ordered by their president down into Ukraine. I think this is This is a smokescreen and typical Russian anti-propaganda.
Is there anything more that Britain can do at this time? We know that the Ukrainians want boots on the ground. That's not going to happen, at least for now, because of the consequences if we did. But they also want more and more heavy artillery.
Yes, and their request is absolutely right. As I suggested earlier, the Russians have come to the conclusion that if they take the close fight to the Ukrainians, the Russians will come off second best and take huge casualties, and they can't afford more casualties. It's already come out in your program this morning that over the 10 years of Afghanistan, the Russians lost a lot of soldiers, but they've lost more than that in the last 3 months. So they are resorting to artillery, which means that the Ukrainians must do the same. So Britain, the West, must supply, and indeed are supplying, larger quantities of artillery pieces and ammunition to go with it, and particularly target acquisition, radars and drones, so that Ukrainian artillerymen can pin back Russian artillery forces to, we call counter battery fire, to reduce the pressure on their own frontline soldiers. So this is very much becoming an artillery battle. And that's actually really why the progress by the Russians in the Donbass has been so slow. They're reluctant to close with the enemy, but they're much more willing to shell from a distance. And that's why the Ukrainians need all the artillery they can get to make an effective counter-battery counterattack.
We've spoken many times about how, I was going to say label, but that's the wrong word, how we should describe what is happening in Ukraine. And we've touched on whether or not it is genocide. You, I know, are closely monitoring the situation. Are you any closer to feeling that it is?
Well, the evidence is mounting up. The question really comes as to when, as I say, sufficient, when the volume of war crimes that can be analysed and recorded is such that it's quite clear that there is a wider malicious intent from the very top behind it, that when that is proven, then that actually makes the case for genocide. Kay, as we said before, back in the Balkans, we thought in the mid-90s we would never get the likes of Milosevic and Karadzic and Mladic into a jail and try them on charges of genocide. Well, they have all been charged, and Karadzic and Mladic are in prison. Whether we'll ever get Putin there, whether he'll actually ever live long enough, that's another question. But other senior Russians may well find themselves facing an international court, or if not that, then the court of history, I think, will judge very harshly. And I think the case of genocide is looking increasingly likely to be proven.
And just returning finally to a topic we touched on during the course of the interview, 9th of May, which is next Monday, and whether, in your opinion, President Putin may take the opportunity then to declare victory in the war in Ukraine. And if so, then what happens? Does he pull his troops out? What happens?
Well, he may well declare victory because, frankly, with his control over state media, he can say what he likes. And tragically, a large proportion of the Russian people will believe what he says. But the fact on the ground is that there is no way that he has achieved a victory. If Mariupol falls, which I think it probably tragically, sadly will do, then he can say that he has achieved a land corridor from Crimea through Donbass to Russia. But that's as far as he can go if he wants to be truthful about it. The sad reality is that at some point, hopefully in the not too distant future, there will be some form of general ceasefire and the war will stop where it is. And where that will be with the Russians having achieved this land corridor, probably having taken control of most of Donetsk and Luhansk province in the Donbass region. And that's where the negotiating will start. But then you have to ask the question, even if the court of world opinion says the Russians were wrong, are they going to leave? Well, I don't think they will. They won't leave of their own free accord, and no one's going to throw them out. NATO and the West is not going to mount an Iraq-style scale operation to throw out the Russians from Ukraine in the same way that Saddam Hussein was thrown out of Kuwait. That just isn't going to happen. So there may have to be the realization of an awful new status quo where 10 to 15% of Ukraine is occupied by Russians, and there's nothing that can be done about it.